Well, Duck fans, that didn't go very well. But on the plus side, it somehow could have been worse because there wasn't a big fight afterwards. That's about the only way it could have been worse. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to this show to get content on the Ducks every day. Thank you to everybody out there who's done so already. We're getting close to 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel, which is way beyond where I thought we'd be at this point. So thank you to everybody out there, and thank you to Max Torres for joining me on the show today. He covers the Ducks for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. My number one just kind of feeling right now, Max, is it happened. It it happened. It happened, and brighter days are ahead. But it's great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, glad to be back, Spencer. Always appreciate you reaching out to have me on. Maybe it'd be a little bit nicer if it was under different circumstances, but Oregon finally played a game against another team, and we have quite a bit of new stuff to talk about. So there's that we can dig into.
Yeah, we definitely will. And Max is battling the heat over there in California without air conditioning. So if you hear a little whirring in the background, it's just his fan. I want to start with this question to you, Max, and I'll share my thoughts after you chime in. Not a lot of things went right. I guess special teams weren't that bad. It was probably the most consistent area for the Ducks throughout the game, which, hasn't always been a strength, but you'd like the offense and defense to be much better than what they showed on Saturday. But of all the things that went wrong, what concerned you the most?
I think of all the things that went wrong for Oregon on Saturday against Georgia, I was really concerned with the missed tackles and just the sloppy fundamentals. Because especially when we're looking at the defense, not that the offense was doing them a whole lot of favors, but for a team that's as experienced as they are on the defensive side of the ball, guys like Noah Sewell, Brandon Dorless, Bennett Williams, not to call those guys out, but just they have a lot of veterans, and they just looked like they didn't know what they were doing at times. Missed arm tackles, just not making plays that they should have made. Not that I could have gone out there and tackled 6'7" Darnell Washington.
Guy is a monster.
There were times like that when it's like, well, that's just Georgia, and there's not a whole lot you can do. But there were a lot more instances, Spencer, where it was like, well, that was just a sloppy play, or like that was a bad effort, or that was undisciplined. So I think for the veteran defense, especially combined with how highly touted this coaching staff was, how experienced they were, how highly acclaimed that they were, they just looked like a team that was flat out not ready and flat out unprepared. So I think all those things combined, it really kind of mirrored the Utah games last season. Like, I think that's what was really concerning about it, is that if you flip on the tape of those three games and put them all side by side, I mean, they got even more dominated against Georgia. I don't know. Maybe that would be a discussion point. Like, it was just ugly all around. If we're talking about the defensive effort, like there were some positives to take away, but people are going to want to focus on the turnovers, on Stetson Bennett having a career day. So I think, just to answer your question off the top, it would be the sloppy fundamentals and just kind of lack of discipline and execution.
Yeah, one of the questions that I've had coming into this season for the Ducks is, what does the secondary look like, right? I trust Christian Gonzalez. I'm very high on him. I think he played quite well. He allowed the touchdown on the back shoulder throw, but if you execute a back shoulder correctly, there's not a corner in the world that can stop it. And I thought he held his own and then some on that side. But the rest of the secondary, man, it was a lot of, like you said, missed tackles, missed assignments, just not being very competitive in coverage. I also noted Triquez Bridges, who it sounded like in the offseason they were moving back to safety, was starting at corner. So Dante Manning, the injury he suffered in the spring was not supposed to be holding him back at all. Don't know if it was, but it seems like Triquez has just surpassed him on the depth chart, and that to me is a concern for a guy who's a former 5-star and has not lived up to that billing so far, and it looks like he might not if he can't even be your starting second corner to Christian Gonzalez, who I really do like. But the secondary just struggled. They looked a step slow, and the thing that concerned me the most from the entire game was the defense specifically, but within that, the number of times they just looked out of sorts. I mean, Georgia ran some tempo. It wasn't, Chip Kelly warp speed tempo, but Oregon wasn't prepared for it. And that was an issue last year, and that was not better. And you had a couple weeks to get ready for this game, more than you will for games in the future, other than a bye week, because you've had fall camp leading up to it. And the defense just didn't look ready. Like, I didn't think Georgia was doing that anything that's spectacular. They weren't throwing the ball over the top and making absurd catches. That DB made a ridiculous interception, something we'll get to a little later in the show. But the defense just, they looked disoriented. They were late getting into their sets. They were not playing with the sort of tenacity that you saw from Georgia's defense. Conversely, even guys like Noah Sewell and Justin Flo did not have great games. I didn't feel, because they were not supremely active in the tackling sense. They might have statistically, but I mean, they were not as involved as we were needing them to be to put up a good defensive effort. And I don't care who you're playing, 7 touchdowns in 7 consecutive drives. When Dan Lanning gets hired as a head coach, coming over as a DC from Georgia, and I am not, in the area where I'm panicked or concerned about him as a coach yet because it's one game, but I was very disappointed that the defense just looked helpless out there. That's what concerned me the most, is the assignments, the communication, and the readiness just were not there. And to me, that's coaching.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you can point to as far as why they looked the way that they did, is because they weren't prepared, which goes back to coaching at the end of the day. And Dan Lanning said after the game, that this one's on me. I take full accountability on what you're supposed to say as a head coach. But
Yes.
I feel like for Oregon fans, the expectations and the bar has been set so high that there's going to be a group of them that are like, okay, so what? Like, show me. Like, you can say that as much as you want, but we want to see a dominant defensive effort. Not only with the coaching staff assembled, but the talent on the roster, the goal, and to a certain degree, given some more time, the expectation, I think, is that 2019 defense under Andy Avalos, like when just Oregon was like untouchable. It almost felt like on defense. They had one of the best units in the country. So I think, the helpless is kind of a decent word to describe them, I would say, Spencer. And part of what made that so concerning for me is kind of thinking about what Kirby Smart said after the game. He was asked, what was the question that you wanted to get answered, or what was it you wanted to see from your team in this game? And he said, I just wanted to see physicality. I told him before the game, like, I don't care what happens in this game, what the end result is, but I just want you to be physical and go out there and dominate. And that's not something that Oregon brought to the table at all. There's getting beat, but you're still making those effort plays and still putting your best foot forward. And then there's just like, oh, well, they have our number today. There's nothing that we can do to, clean this one up or get any better. So we didn't see that physicality from Oregon at all, except for Justin Flo's hit on Stetson Bennett. Like, that might have been the defensive highlight of the day. And then he got called for roughing the passer, even though he hit him a second after he let it go. I thought that was ridiculous.
Oh no, it was a bad call. Not that it mattered. We're not here to talk about bad calls. We're here to talk about bad football.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I think you definitely hit it on the head as far as just, looking like they were out of sorts. And that's like one of the biggest things that I'm kind of keeping in mind right now. And I actually just wrote a piece in my Torres's take about keeping perspective on this game, because we need to call out just, the being out of sorts, the bad communication, the poor execution. But it's also Georgia. Like, I wasn't expecting them to win this game. And Georgia's that good. Yes. But I don't think Oregon is that bad. I certainly wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. And there was something else Kirby Smart said that is noteworthy here, which we'll get to after I remind you about Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. I had one the other day, s'mores. Oh my gosh, is it amazing. Guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? Delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite, the cookie dough chunk puffs. They have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, covered in 100% real chocolate. They're made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. Go get your Built Bar Puff cookie dough flavor bars today at built.com. Use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. Promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Kirby Smart had an interesting comment after the Oregon-Georgia game where he said, Dan Lanning will never admit this, but we have better players. And on the whole, that is true. There is a gap when you look at the recruiting composite rankings and everything between Oregon and Georgia. And I knew that going in. There are a lot of guys on Oregon's roster who I like, but are not, a good way to think about it is if you look at Oregon's roster on either side, how many of those guys would start for Georgia? Probably Sewell and Flo. I actually don't think Dorless starts. Again, I like him in the Pac-12 and such, but I think we saw in that game. I don't think he would have started for Georgia. Maybe a rotation guy. Gonzalez could have a chance. That's probably it because I love Ferguson as a tight end. He's not as good as Georgia's tight ends. The running backs, again, like them, but not on that sort of level. There is a talent gap here between Oregon and Georgia. But that does not excuse what we saw on Saturday. The gap is not 49-3. And I think what you saw was a culmination of two things. Number one, Georgia did have better players and better athletes who were able to beat Oregon to the perimeter on both sides of the ball and control the game in that sense with physical dominance. And number two, you had a coaching staff that's been there for, 6-7 years or so, led by Kirby Smart, who just won a national championship, and you have a head coach in Dan Lanning who hadn't been a head coach at the college level before we're recording this on Sunday, so yesterday. That's kind of how it looked, and I think that's how you get 49-3. Is you have better players, and Dan Lanning and his staff, they got out coached. The execution for Georgia was sharper. There were moments on both sides of the ball, I felt, where the Ducks, especially on defense, like I talked about earlier, but like Bo Nix's second interception was a terrible throw, but go back and look at the play. The players don't look like they are in the right spots or that they are, sure of where they're supposed to be. It looks like a little bit of a broken pass play, and I think those sorts of little details that hopefully will come with this staff as time goes on is part of the reason that this game got away from Oregon so quickly.
Yeah, and that quote from Kirby was definitely one of the more interesting ones, wasn't it? I was watching that press conference, and everything he was saying was super professional. First thing, I want to thank everybody at the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, or Kickoff Bowl, whatever it is. They do a great job. Always class act. And then he was like saying, I don't feel like our depth is where it needs to be at the skill positions aside from tight end. Just like kind of shrugging off a bunch of praise. And then he got to getting asked about Lanning, and he was like, this wasn't about playing Dan Lanning. And then he got to that part about saying, he'll never admit it, but we have better players. And I was like, oh, wow. Well, I was not expecting to hear that. Although I think to a degree it's true, but I like your point. It's not 49-3 true.
No.
But it was kind of a wake-up call to a degree, or a reality check a little bit for Oregon, because they've improved in recruiting, but they've only really done it since like 2019, and Georgia's done it for 7 or 8, 10 cycles. Like, they've always been, it feels like, a recruiting powerhouse. And then there's another step too to all of this, Spencer. You can get all the talent in the world that you want. If that talent doesn't get on the field, if that talent doesn't get developed, what does it mean? It is absolutely worthless, because those guys aren't helping your team. They're not contributing on Saturdays. And Georgia has not only stacked elite talent, they have a consistent coaching. They have consistency on their coaching staff, rather, which is a point that you made, and I like that point. I think that was definitely a good one worth making. But they have that consistency, which is something that Oregon hasn't necessarily had. And they're still trying to figure out, how do we consistently get guys from the recruiting ranks to come to Oregon, and then how do we go about getting them on the field sooner? And that's something that I think I that was one of the criticisms that I had of the last staff, is that they were playing down to their opponents. That's coaching, bad coaching. And because of that, they weren't able to get a lot of these young guys on the field. Georgia had to fill in for a lot of starters that they lost last year, right? Especially in the secondary. But when I'm doing research on these guys pregame and, learning about them, it's like, oh, played in 12 of Georgia's 15 games last year. Doesn't have any like jaw-dropping stats, but they were playing. They were getting the reps. They were having that experience, which is obviously invaluable when you have to go from, a historic all-time defense and try to follow it up. So I think that it was definitely an interesting comment to hear from Kirby, but I don't think he was necessarily out of line to make it, because there is still that recruiting gap between Oregon and Georgia rather. And then when you get those guys, just because you get them doesn't mean you're going to win these big time games or win even games in conference, which is something that we saw last year when Oregon got punched in the mouth by Utah.
I think you make a really interesting point that I want to build on about getting guys on the field and development being a part of it. When a player comes in, and I talk a lot about recruiting on my show, I know you do as well, and there's a reason. Recruiting matters. The best programs in the country, if anyone ever tells you, just as a general word, that, the recruiting's not as important or whatnot, just this is an easy response that makes the point succinctly. If it doesn't matter as much as people hype it up to matter, why does Alabama, Georgia, and Clemson and Ohio State take it so seriously? That's it. The best teams recruit at a high level, and there's reason. But when a kid comes in as a 4 or a high 4 or even a 5-star recruit, I think it's easy for people in their mind to say, oh, he's going to slide in and be a starter and he'll be a good player. He could. But there are two components to being a good football player. And this was another gap I saw between Oregon's players and Georgia's. Experience is part of it. Coaching is another part of it. The instincts and reaction times to those Georgia players that is coached into them and their intuition to play the game of football is not something you can quantify very easily in a star ranking when a guy is a recruit and evaluating. You're typically looking at, traits he has, physical gifts, or something that projects as something he'll be able to do and develop to become a good college football player. But you still have to learn the game. And Justin Flo, I think, is a great example. We all know the guy's physical gifts. He is a freak. He's the sort of guy who would go to Georgia normally, right? And that's why Oregon's very excited to have him. He was lost. If you watch closely, he was lost several times. He didn't have the correct assignment on that crazy runaround touchdown from Stetson Bennett. Dan Lanning pulled Justin Flo aside and was talking to him and was having one of those moments of coaching that you can't have if you haven't been on the field the way he hasn't, and was talking to him about, hey, when the quarterback's under pressure, you're a linebacker. We need you to stay in coverage there unless you're on a blitzing assignment. And that's something that is really underrated in college football, and what programs like Utah, who unfortunately took an L this weekend down in Florida, and a terrible weekend for the Pac-12 on the whole. Not everybody. Arizona, Oregon State had great weekends, but on the whole, the conference, not a great look because of how this Oregon game went and how the Utah-Florida game played out. But you still have to coach instincts and football IQ and reaction times into these guys. And that was the biggest difference is Oregon looked like they were see and react, and Georgia looked like once they had a certain tell on defense, they were able to just jump in, make the play, and they were correct. And that comes with time, and it comes with proper coaching.
Another thing that might factor into it, and I don't mean to have this come off as an excuse, but is the new scheme. Like, that's another challenge that Oregon has had to factor in here. New offense, new defense. And Lanning had talked about that numerous times, throughout the spring, about you hear the whole phrase about drinking out of a fire hose. And then, you get into fall and they had a scrimmage and they were saying, no more installs now, like everything's in there. So we don't want guys to have to overthink or overcomplicate. We just want them to go out there and, I guess react, but also, like you were saying, play with that instinct, just commit, play with confidence, fly around. And that's kind of what it felt like for Oregon, is that they were still trying to, feel things out. Like, am I in the right spot? And I think it wasn't that much of a surprise if you look back to the spring game, because if you look at the film from the spring game, the offense was doing really well and, throwing the ball around and having all these explosive plays, but coverage was not where it needed to be. And you saw that show up again against Georgia. So I don't want to be overly critical here, but there are definitely, aspects that need some attention there when it comes to Oregon's defensive effort. And slowing that team down. Like, when Stetson Bennett, like, here's a perfect comparison. When the 5 or 6 plays where Oregon actually got some pressure on Stetson Bennett, did he lose his marbles? No, he just acted calmly in the pocket, collected himself, and then made a play, or he got rid of it. When things kind of broke down for Bo Nix, he was, kind of rattled and overthinking things and making bad plays worse, which is what we've heard the staff say in the past. I think that, like we talked about a little bit earlier, that first pick was just a phenomenal play. I don't think it was the best throw in the world. I don't think that there were a lot of throws where you're like, dang, that was a really nice throw by Bo. But
I didn't think I didn't think it was that, but I want to talk about that real quick, and then you can
Sure.
get back to your point. So I didn't have a problem with the decision in a major way. I will say, if you're going to take that one-on-one shot, which, by the way, is what we've been clamoring for all offseason, right, is a play just like that. It wasn't there a year ago. The defensive back made an incredible play. It was not a poorly thrown ball as much it was a guy who is still learning to play wide receiver in Seven McGee is going up against a player who is more physically gifted than him. I think he was literally bigger than Seven McGee. That's a ball I would rather see. I put that interception a little bit on Kenny Dillingham. I think it's half on. I don't think it's even half on Bo. I was okay with the decision. I was okay with the ball. It was not really that poorly placed. The guy made an incredible play, but go watch what Seven McGee does. He kind of loses his feet, and he's not in a great position to make a play on the ball. I would have liked to seen Kenny Dillingham dial up that sort of shot in that spot for a Troy Franklin or a Dante Thornton or even a Chase Cota. I don't know if he'd been hit at that particular time, but that was my reaction to it. The second interception was just bad from Bo. It was as someone put it on Twitter, the Bo heard round the world when Kenny Dillingham watched the play unfold from the press box, and he's calling the plays, and he goes, Bo! We couldn't hear him, but we could see that's what he was saying. I thought that was pretty funny because it was like, yeah, that's what we're all going at. But I had to get that out there on that interception because, like, you have to be okay with the occasional pick every now and then. Like, to me, I watched that and I was like, you know what? Tip the cap. That's a good play. That's like in golf, it's match play. I've got 12 feet for birdie. He's got 30. I missed and he made. Like, you know what? Tip of the cap. Great putt. Sometimes your opponent just makes a play.
Yeah, and that's kind of the tone that I was trying to convey. I was just saying, like looking at the actual ball, like, I don't think it was super impressive, like tight spiral type of a deal. But, like, I don't think it was a bad play. And you make a good point about that's what Oregon fans wanted all last season. Yeah. So it is, you do have to live with that. It's just tough too, I think, because of how early both of them came, and because we already knew that, I wrote about this, that the margin for error was so minuscule. And then when you make those you have those turnovers, Georgia's the type of team that's going to make you pay for it 9 times out of 10. So, like, that was super hard because they were on back-to-back drives. It was still early in the game. I'm sure that didn't help his confidence. But, yeah, that play by Malachi Starks was amazing. But then the second interception looked like it was almost into triple coverage, and that DB just read Bo like a book and charged up and took it. I guess one nice thing for that is that he was trying to find Patrick Herbert, and he was playing, and all the tight ends, I think, except for Terrell Tillman, maybe made an appearance. So I think the tight ends are going to be more involved. But yeah, so I don't want to be overly critical of Bo, but obviously the turnovers played a big part. And a lot of people are saying, well, that's kind of what it looked like at Auburn, but it's also against Georgia. So I think that we'll get a much more reasonable read on Bo when they play BYU. I think that he could have a great game next week, and maybe people will make a little bit too much of that. I could see it happening, but, it's Eastern Washington. We got to keep perspective here. So I think BYU, like I've seen a lot of people say on Twitter, is going to be a much better read about not only where Bo's at, but really where the team's at as a whole.
Yeah, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I perhaps should have led the show with this, but this is not, look, was it disappointing? Yeah, I was really disappointed that it went this way. I said going in, the one thing Oregon can't do is get blown out the way USC did to Alabama in I think it was 2018. That's the one thing you can't do, and that's exactly what happened. Like that was the only, in my view, that was the only really bad outcome, right? This was the only bad outcome. If you'd been, within 14 to 17, and then Georgia has a late touchdown and ends up winning by 20 plus, and the final score is like 38 to 17 or something like that. But people who watched it know the game was closer throughout. That would have been okay. But this was what you couldn't have happen. And I didn't see it going that way going into the game or Max when it started. I was texting a friend as the action was unfolding there in the first quarter. And the only thing, again, special teams were fine. Return game, not very good. But I'm glad Seven McGee is back there because he's not going to go up against Georgia bodies. I mean, he's probably got mid to high 4-star guys tackling there on special teams coverage. That's the way Georgia recruits. But the offense for the first couple of drives, they moved the ball. And I was watching it going, if you can move the ball like that against Georgia, then I feel pretty good about how you're going to be able to do that against teams in the Pac-12 or BYU. And then the turnovers came, right? And that thwarted a couple of drives, and they didn't execute very well once they got on the other side. And some of that is Georgia's defense being really good. But the only real positive thing outside of Camden Lewis looking like the kicker he was a season ago is that the offense was moving the ball. The running game was not non-existent. I think it was like 4.5 yards a carry against the Georgia defense, and that offensive line that we've hyped up all offseason leading up to this game and beyond looks like they're going to be up to the task, because if you can create some running lanes for one of the 72 running backs that Oregon's handing the ball off to, then I think they're going to be able to do that just fine in conference play. But I also felt like they were moving the ball. There were a couple of nice early completions to receivers. There were a couple of smart play calls from Kenny Dillingham, and then obviously it all went awry, but they were moving the ball, and it looked like they would get in the end zone eventually, and then things just kind of sputtered out.
Yeah, and that's a good point you make. I don't want to be agreeing with all your points here, but no, it makes sense. Like, that
It's
they were
okay.
able.
When I exude wisdom, it's okay to just say that I'm right.
No, yeah, you're making good points, and I want to try to build off them and contribute to the conversation rather than just repeat what you're saying. But yeah, 31 carries for 144 rushing yards,
That's
140 rushing
good.
yards, excuse me, 4.5 yards a carry. Like,
Yep.
that's good, especially. But like, what I was gonna say, so I liked overall what we saw from the ground game. It was pretty surprising to see that many different guys touch the ball. But you have to think about it. There's no CJ Verdell. There's no Travis Dye. Like, it's wide open. It's anybody's room, it feels like. And then once these were really ugly, Jordan James ended up getting most of the carries. So that was kind of cool to see just because he was a true freshman.
Yeah.
But yeah, like to your point, they were able to get some push on the line of scrimmage. Maybe feeling more confident in the run blocking than the pass blocking. But that was a strength last year too. So it's good to show that you can kind of hang in there with Georgia from a physicality standpoint, just moving the ball, but then, you don't want to beat yourself. So I thought that was encouraging to see. I might've been a little overcritical of them, immediately after the game, because there were some plays like, that video of Salah getting bullied by Jalen Carter, like that went really viral on Twitter yesterday.
That's a top 10 pick. That's a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. No
Exactly.
one on the Oregon offensive line is going to go up against a guy who would, again, as I alluded to earlier with the Ducks, who are they going to play who would start on that Georgia defense again, or offense, frankly? Like, Caleb Williams could maybe start over Stetson Bennett, maybe. I don't know. Stetson Bennett won national championship, so he's clearly undervalued. I don't know. I can't think of a single player off the top of my head that would start for Georgia that Oregon's going to play the rest of the year, frankly, particularly in the trenches. So I thought the offensive line held up fine. I think it was a personnel and coaching mismatch. I think that's the easiest way to look at it.
Yeah. So I liked what I saw from the offensive line overall. Might be worth noting that we didn't see much of Ryan Walk down the stretch. Marcus Harper
he got hurt.
So maybe something to watch moving forward. Jackson Powers Johnson also wasn't available in this game. Neither was Popo Amavai. So a couple names to keep an eye on as we head into the week. I'm sure we'll ask Lanning about that tomorrow or Tuesday, depending on the holiday schedule.
I'm sure you will get no response from him too.
Yeah, We'll see. Yeah, he's definitely holding things very close to the chest. But yeah, just to kind of give some final thoughts, I liked what I saw from the play calling perspective. Maybe you want to see some more of those deep shots dialed up, but you kind of have to run like the basics of your offense well first and keep moving the ball and not shoot yourself in the foot, not slow down drives, not turn the ball over if you really want everything to be, operating full tilt. So I think one of the big storylines last year, early in the season, was you beat Ohio State. Now, how do you look against Stony Brook? And now it's you lost to Georgia, but how do you look against Eastern Washington,
Good point.
BYU? Like, how do you take what you learned in Atlanta from that absolute beatdown and use it to carry you forward throughout the rest of the season? Because Lanning said it himself, everything this team wants to do is still in front of them. Are they a playoff caliber team? Probably not, but they can still win the Pac-12. They can still get to a good New Year's Six bowl, and they can still put a good product out on the field that's gonna help convince recruits that they are capable of developing talent and sending them to the league, and that Oregon's a good spot for them. And we saw that on Friday night. Amari Washington committed to Oregon, and now they have another big defensive lineman around 300 pounds in the fold for 23. So it's not all doom and gloom. Yeah, it was a bad game, but it's the first game of the season. So I think that it's you take your lumps now, and then hopefully you can use those to build off of and get better from moving forward.
Well, Oregon took just a few more lumps than we would have perhaps liked, but brighter days are ahead with Max Torres covering the Ducks for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. Appreciate you taking the time, as always, man. And Duck fans, we're always here for you. If you want to talk, at Smalls_55 at M Torres Sports. If you just want to hop in there and just rant, I can't believe it. It was terrible. I flew out of the game. I was so excited. I was disappointed. We will be your therapists. We
Hey,
are.
that happened to me. I put out a couple tweets about takeaways from the game. Someone was saying an early hot seat for Dan Lanning, which was absolutely ridiculous.
Oh gosh,
Someone was
no.
saying they
Oh,
don't deserve
please,
to be
no.
ranked after losing to the number 3 team in the entire country. And I mean, God, come on, like keep it
Yeah,
in perspective. The sky isn't
yeah.
falling.
No, the sky is not falling yet. Good to talk to you as always, Max.
Appreciate it, Spencer. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.